My name is Doyle. When I was 10 years old, I had a very strange hobby. I loved wandering through the woods to find animal bones and bring them home to keep as treasures. My family lived in a neighborhood right on the edge of the forest. Behind our neighbor's house, there was a trail that led deep into the old-growth woods. Every kid in the area was strictly forbidden from going back there, but because of my obsession, I always found a way to sneak past the rules. I usually slipped away when my parents weren't paying attention. Once I successfully escaped into the woods, I would jump for joy and start my search. I could spend hours, or even a whole afternoon, with my head down, eyes scanning the ground, and hands constantly digging through the dirt. One afternoon, I prepared to head into the forest as usual. From the moment I stepped past the tree line behind the neighbor's house, I had an uneasy feeling I couldn't explain. But it was a perfect opportunity because my parents were going to be home late. Plus, my collection was almost complete, so I decided to push forward. The forest was incredibly quiet that day. There was no sun, so the scenery looked very gloomy. I thought about turning back, but then a small glint of light suddenly appeared between the trees. I was curious because I had never seen it before, and I subconsciously started to follow it. I went deep inside, deeper than I had ever gone before, until the light vanished. In front of me stood an old wooden cabin I had never seen. The roof was rotting, the windows were dark like empty eye sockets, and vines covered the walls. It looked exactly like a witch's house from the cartoons I used to watch. I felt a chill, but I was also excited, so I moved closer. Right next to the porch, I was drawn to a bunch of bones scattered on the ground. I assumed they were animal bones, so I knelt down to examine them. However, I quickly realized that some of the bones had unusual shapes. They were also quite large compared to the types I usually collected. I kept looking, thinking I might find a perfect piece to add to my collection. As I stepped forward, I saw a skull resting in a pile of decaying leaves. The black, hollow eye sockets were staring right at me. A cold shiver ran down my spine. But for a kid with such a weird hobby, I was pretty brave. I leaned in even closer to get a look, using my hand to brush away some leaves so I could see it clearly. When the skull was fully exposed, I saw that the jaw didn't look like any animal I owned, like a dog or a fox. And then, my heart hammered so hard it felt like it would explode out of my chest when I realized it was a human skull. I screamed and ran for my life. I crashed through thorn bushes, not daring to look back. Just as I was about to make it out of the woods, I suddenly saw a man standing right in the middle of the trail. He was very tall and thin, wearing a heavy coat even though the weather wasn't cold at all. What terrified me the most was his unblinking stare and a subtle, knowing smirk. I stopped a few yards away from him. Suddenly, he tilted his head, looked at me, and asked in a very low voice, "Did you find any bones?" That question made me freeze for a few seconds. I was stunned that he knew what I had been doing. I didn't answer. I just closed my eyes and bolted past him, heading straight for home. When I saw my parents, I immediately burst into tears and told them everything. After I described the location of the cabin, my father's expression completely changed. For the first time, I heard my parents talk about something the adults in the neighborhood had always kept secret from the children. 5 years earlier, a boy my age had gone missing after walking into those woods alone. The police searched for nearly a year but found nothing. After the incident, the boy's parents were so heartbroken that they moved away. The case had remained a mystery ever since. The police immediately cordoned off the forest for almost a week. My parents absolutely refused to tell me what they found inside that cabin. But from that day on, the trail behind the neighbor's house was fenced off, and I was permanently banned from going near those woods again. Whenever I remember it, the fear returns. I don't want to confirm the truth. But what makes me wake up gasping in the middle of the night is the memory of that man on the trail. That unblinking stare and the question about the bones. Was he the killer? And if he was, why was he still there after all those years? My name is Chris, and this is a story about something I saw with my own eyes 5 years ago. To this day, I still don't have the courage to open the photos I took that night. It was a solo camping trip over the weekend. I chose a remote forest located about a 2-hour drive from the nearest town. As I drove deeper into the woods, my cell phone signal disappeared completely. After setting up my tent by a creek, I grabbed my camera. I decided to hike deeper into the forest to catch some landscape shots at sunset. While following a strange, moss-covered trail, I suddenly spotted flickering lights in the distance. As I got closer, I discovered an old church sitting isolated in a large clearing. In front of the church, hundreds of people dressed in white were gathered in total silence around a tree. At first, I was just curious. I figured it was some kind of strange local religious ceremony, so I hid behind a large trunk to watch. But very quickly, my curiosity turned into pure horror. A thin man, with his hands and feet tightly bound, was kneeling at the base of the tree. A rope was looped around his neck and tossed over a high branch. 3 well-dressed men, who looked very different from the rest of the crowd, stepped forward. They began to pull the rope that hung over the branch. The man was instantly yanked upward, his feet dangling and kicking in midair. The surrounding crowd began to sing in unison. The man struggled violently and tried to scream for help, but the singing drowned him out. I felt like my legs were going to give out. I was all alone, and I knew I would be in grave danger if I confronted that many people. With no cell service, I couldn't call anyone for help. After only a few minutes, the man stopped moving completely. As soon as his limp body was lowered to the ground, the crowd began to cheer joyfully, as if they had just finished a sacred ritual. In total shock, I raised my camera and snapped a few photos for evidence. Then, I scrambled away in a daze. While trying to find my way back to camp, I accidentally circled around to the back of the church. I stumbled upon a field filled with wooden crosses packed tightly together. Many of the mounds of dirt were fresh and bright red, looking as if they had just been filled. At the edge of the field, I saw a child, about 10 years old, tied to a tree. I rushed over to untie the boy, but his reaction sent a chill down my spine. He wasn't scared, and he wasn't happy to see me. He looked at me with eyes that were completely hollow and soulless. When I urged him to run with me, he just shook his head. He spoke as calmly as if he were talking about a field trip. "I can't go yet. It's almost my turn. After the wedding day, we will all get to see God." I shuddered as I realized this child had been completely brainwashed. The wedding day ritual he mentioned was the horrific strangling I had just witnessed. As I tried to convince him one more time, a shout rang out behind me. 2 tall men in dark coats emerged from the shadows. They pointed directly at me and screamed. I tried to pull the boy with me to run, but he broke free and refused to follow. I had no choice. I had to run to save my own life. It was a true fight for survival. I tore through thorn bushes, feeling the sharp branches rip into my skin. The number of men in black chasing me grew. In my panic, I slipped and tumbled down a small slope, hitting a rock hard. I could barely stand up. However, the slope hid me from view, and the forest was thick and dark. I lay perfectly still as the men ran right past me without noticing. I had accidentally found the perfect hiding spot. Once I was sure they were gone, I crawled out and ran toward the main road near town before dawn. I immediately took all my photos and my story to the local police station. I thought I had uncovered a mass kidnapping and murder site, and I expected a large-scale rescue mission. But their reaction was confusing. They glanced at the photos, exchanged a knowing look with each other, and simply said they would send someone to check it out. A few days later, I was told that the leader of the group had been arrested, but was quickly released due to insufficient evidence. I tried to explain about the strangled man and the tied-up child, but the police claimed it could have been a voluntary religious ritual. They said my photos weren't clear enough to prove anything. I was stunned and felt completely helpless against their ridiculous excuses and lazy investigation. A few days later, while I was still reeling from the shock, I received an anonymous text. "Stop digging if you want to stay safe." That was when I understood. The leader's release wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. It gave him time to go back and scrub the evidence now that I had exposed the location. Perhaps those well-dressed men pulling the rope had much deeper connections than just some forest cult. For the past 5 years, I had been haunted by that child's hollow eyes. I watched a crime happen right in front of me, but in the end, I couldn't save anyone. I might have even accidentally helped the killers cover their tracks. I still have those photos on an old hard drive, but I have never dared to look at them again. The story is inspired by a real-life case. The Shakahola cult, led by Paul Mackenzie, is considered one of Kenya's most horrific tragedies. Initially, Mackenzie lured hundreds of followers with staged miracle cures, then brainwashed them into believing the apocalypse was coming and that modern society was a tool of evil. He forced followers to sell all their possessions and move to an isolated 800-acre forest. There, Mackenzie ordered followers to starve to death to meet God, with children dying first. When many no longer wanted to die, he created a wedding day ritual where guards directly strangled or beat victims to death amidst the cheers of the crowd. By 2024, authorities had unearthed more than 450 bodies, many victims showing signs of organ harvesting. Mackenzie and dozens of accomplices are currently being prosecuted for murder, terrorism, and child torture. I accidentally saved the monster on a snowy night. I have lived alone in a log cabin deep in the woods of Montana for nearly 15 years. It was the most violent blizzard I had seen in all my years in the forest. In the middle of the night, while I was reinforcing the cabin door, I heard a frantic knocking and the sound of someone moaning. When I opened the door, I was shocked to see a young man in terrible shape, nearly frozen to death. He was shaking uncontrollably in tattered clothes, and his face was as white as a sheet. He kept whispering, begging me to let him stay for just one night. Seeing him like that, I couldn't turn him away. I threw more wood into the fireplace, grabbed a blanket, and made him a hot pot of tea. After he calmed down a bit, he thanked me, though his voice was still trembling. It was clear he had been through something absolutely horrific. I checked on him and learned his name was Philip. He said he had been on a hiking trip with his girlfriend, Mia, to propose to her. Hearing this made me suspicious. This time of year was a terrible time for a long hike. Philip started telling his story through choked sobs, claiming they were attacked by wild animals. He said he had to watch Mia being torn apart right in front of his eyes, unable to do anything to help. He sat huddled by the fire, muttering about the gruesome scene like someone on the verge of a mental breakdown. I tried to comfort Philip and asked for the exact location of the attack. I know this terrain like the back of my hand and trust my survival skills. I thought maybe there was still hope for Mia, or at least I could bring back whatever was left of her. But Philip didn't answer. He just kept crying and calling out his girlfriend's name. I figured he was too traumatized to talk, so I stopped pushing and went to cook him a bowl of soup. As I brought the soup out, the storm outside reached its peak. The wind was so strong that falling branches slammed against the cabin's tin roof with a loud roar. I quickly went around the house to make sure everything was secure, but when I walked back into the living room, the atmosphere had turned bone-chilling. Philip wasn't crying anymore. He wasn't shaking or huddling either. He was sitting straight up in the chair with an eerily calm expression, his sharp eyes staring directly at me. A remote location, extreme weather, plus the hungry animals out there, Philip repeated slowly, looking out the window. There was something in his tone that made my blood run cold. Then, Philip gave a slight smile. It's the perfect way to make sure nobody ever finds anything. I froze. The bowl of soup in my hand nearly slipped to the floor. Philip looked up at me, and his eyes were now the eyes of a predator enjoying his prize. Philip began to speak in a flat, calm voice about how he had lured Mia into an area with animal tracks. He described watching her panic and run into the blizzard, and how the forest quickly swallowed her screams. He wasn't a victim. He was a killer who was proud of his crime. He burst into a delighted laugh that echoed throughout the cabin. In that moment, I realized I had invited a demon into my home. I stayed as calm as I could, trying not to draw his attention as I backed up toward the wall near the dining table. My hunting shotgun was hanging right there, but Philip was faster than I expected. The moment my hand touched the gun, he pulled a folding knife from his jacket and lunged at me like a rabid animal. Everything happened in a flash. We wrestled in the middle of the cramped cabin. I realized he was much stronger than he looked, and every strike he threw was aimed to kill. The sharp blade kept grazing my face.
I managed to point the barrel at him, but in a split second of hesitation because I didn't want to become a killer myself, Philip lunged and knocked the gun aside. Immediately after, he buried the blade deep into my shoulder. Philip laughed with excitement when he heard me scream in pain. His overconfidence gave me one last chance. I pushed through the pain, used every bit of my strength to kick him hard in the stomach, and scrambled for the gun. Philip lunged again, but this time, I was faster. As soon as I grabbed the shotgun, I aimed at his legs and pulled the trigger repeatedly. But instead of screaming in agony, he just looked down at his wounds and started laughing like a complete madman. I quickly tied him up and secured him to the window bars. Since there was no cell service to call the police, I had to guard this wild animal all through the night and until the next afternoon. The ordeal ended when I handed Philip over to the police and gave them all the information about the girl named Mia. According to what I learned later, the police found traces of the crime. Mia was real, but all that remained of the poor girl were 2 fingers and a single shoe buried in the snow. She had been consumed by wild animals, exactly as his cruel plan intended. Ever since that night with Philip, if a man knocks on my door, I refuse to open it. I thought I had lived in the woods long enough to know what was dangerous, until I opened the door and let Philip inside.
My name is Hal, and I am 30 years old. My girlfriend Emily and I are both freelancers. Our lives are never rooted in one place. We live full-time in our van with our 2 dogs, working and traveling across the United States. But sometimes, that freedom comes with risks I never truly expected. I will never forget the fateful day of January 24th, 2023. That day, we were camping in a very remote area in Texas. From early morning, the sky looked gloomy with heavy gray clouds. We turned on our NOAA weather radio to keep track of the situation. At first, we thought it would just be a normal thunderstorm, maybe a bit loud, but it would pass. But the air inside the van suddenly felt suffocating when the radio announced, "Tornado confirmed in the orange sector." Emily looked at me, startled. She rushed to check the weather radar on her phone and gasped, "How? We are right in the middle of that orange zone." I looked at her, worried and speechless. An orange zone meant high danger. A tornado was very likely to hit. We started discussing a plan to move, but everything happened too fast. The wind began to howl, and rain poured down like a waterfall, slamming against the sides of the van. Emily completely panicked. She kept asking me, "Where do we go? What do we do? I can't stay calm, Hal." Because Emily was so upset, I had to force myself to stay level-headed, even though I was just as terrified inside. Our two dogs huddled in the corner of the van. They could sense the tension and the danger in the air. I quickly assessed the situation. The only road out of the area was already blocked by fallen trees and flying debris. Initially, we decided to hunker down inside the van, hoping it would be strong enough to protect us. I pulled Emily close, trying to reassure her that everything would be okay. But that tiny bit of hope was cruelly crushed. The radio blared an emergency alert. A large and extremely dangerous tornado has been located in the area. Complete destruction is possible. Take cover immediately. The phrase, complete destruction, echoed in my head like a death sentence. Suddenly, the van didn't feel like a fortress anymore. It felt like a thin tin can waiting to be crushed. Emily began to sob, clutching me and the two dogs as if it were the last time. Then, the peak of the horror arrived. A strange sound came from the distance. At first, it was a low rumble on the horizon, but within seconds, it amplified into an earth-shattering roar. "What is that? Is that a train?" Emily screamed through her tears. The roar sounded like dozens of freight trains charging toward us at a terrifying speed. I realized that was the freight train sound people always use to describe a tornado. It was headed straight for us. The van began to shake violently against the force of the wind. Everything inside flipped over, shattering across the floor. I could feel the van being lifted, tilting to one side. In a split second, I realized staying in the car was suicide. The van would be tossed like a dry leaf, and we would die inside it. "Move! Get out now! To the back!" I yelled. Pure instinct took over. I threw open the back doors of the van. The wind immediately rushed in, blowing our belongings out into the storm. We grabbed the dogs and leaped out of the van into a storm that was tearing the sky apart. About 10 yards away, there was a shallow drainage ditch filled with swirling mud and murky water. We dove into it. I pushed Emily and the dogs flat against the bottom of the ditch and used my own body to shield them. In that moment, I heard the sound of metal being torn apart right above my head. The screaming wind wasn't just wind anymore. It was the roar of a monster swallowing everything in its path. Dirt, rocks, branches, and pieces of our van flew over us. I squeezed my eyes shut, feeling the freezing, muddy water soak into my skin, silently praying for a miracle. "You're going to be okay, I promise. We're going to make it," I whispered in her ear. It felt like it lasted forever, but in reality, it was probably only 5 to 7 minutes. The eye of the tornado passed, the train sound faded away, and all that was left was heavy rain and the haunting silence of a battlefield. When we slowly lifted our heads from the mud, the landscape was completely unrecognizable. Our van was flipped on its side, twisted like a piece of crumpled paper. Nearby storage buildings had been leveled into piles of brick and scrap. But somehow, we were still there. Emily, the dogs, and I, all of us were soaked, shivering, and covered in mud, but no one was seriously hurt. We held each other tight in the middle of the wreckage, crying tears of joy because we were alive. The decision to leave the van at the last second saved our lives. If we had stayed inside for one more minute, the outcome would have been unthinkable. In that life-or-death moment, love and survival instinct led us to make the right choice.
This story happened in the summer of 2011, when I was only 14 years old. To give you a better picture, my family owned a remote piece of land in western Maryland. It was private property deep in the mountains, where almost everyone living nearby was related to my family in one way or another. I grew up there running around with my cousins, and I always believed it was the safest place in the world. But a fateful day by the Savage River shattered that innocent belief forever. It was a sweltering summer afternoon. My cousin, who was 1 year older than me, and I decided to go for a walk along the rugged dirt path that follows the rushing Savage River. My cousin was a little junior entomologist, so he spent the whole time with his eyes glued to the ground,
looking for bugs or crawfish. I just strolled along beside him, enjoying the sound of the water hitting the rocks. Everything seemed normal until I heard a very distinct sound. A sharp click echoed through the quiet air. It wasn't a branch snapping, and it wasn't the sound of stones hitting each other. I whipped my head toward the opposite bank of the river. Not even 15 feet away, a stranger had just stepped out from the thick brush. He was wearing a black jacket and holding a camera that was still pointed directly at me. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I saw his large frame and felt the terrifying certainty that he was staring right at me. Then, he smiled. I knew he was smiling because I could see his teeth clearly. His shoulders shook slightly, and a low, muffled laugh drifted across the water. Before I could even react, I heard another click. He took a second photo. I flinched and stepped back, but I froze. Then, he lowered his camera, kept that same smile on his face, and slowly wagged his index finger back and forth. The gesture was unmistakable, exactly like the way an adult wags their finger when scolding a child for doing something wrong. I didn't know what that signal meant, but my heart started racing. Next, he pointed down at his side. I followed his hand and saw a knife sheath attached to his belt. Then, he brought his hand up to his throat and slowly, deliberately, drew his finger across it in a slit throat motion. In that moment, my mind went completely blank. I couldn't think of anything specific. I only had one reflex. I lunged over, grabbed my cousin's arm, and screamed, "Run! Run now!" As soon as we turned to bolt, I heard a third click behind us, followed immediately by the sound of water splashing. Splash! Splash! He was wading through the river, coming after us. I sprinted for my life through the dense bushes, my heart pounding like it wanted to jump out of my chest. The path back home was full of rocks and slippery roots. In my total panic, I tripped over a dry branch and fell face first into the dirt. I hit the ground so hard that I could taste the thick, metallic flavor of blood in my mouth. I had bitten through my lip. My knees and hands were stinging, but my fear was 1,000 times stronger than the pain. I wasn't on the ground for even 3 seconds before I scrambled back up, pulling my cousin along as we kept flying. I swear I could hear branches snapping right behind me. When the campsite finally appeared ahead, my legs were nearly numb. My breath was ragged, my throat was bone dry, and my lip was swelling up from the cut. I ran straight into the middle of the adults and told them everything. I described his throat slit gesture in detail, using both my words and my hands. My grandfather didn't ask many questions. He and a few other men in the family grabbed their rifles and headed toward the river path. The atmosphere turned incredibly tense. They searched for 2 hours. When they came back, they shook their heads and said no one was there. They found no suspicious signs at all. When my mother heard this, she sighed. She looked at me with a stern expression and said I was probably just panicking and letting my imagination run wild. "Look at how you've hurt yourself just being so worked up," she said. Of course, I argued back immediately. I tried to explain that I fell because I was running for my life, but she wouldn't change her mind. I turned to my cousin, hoping he would confirm what we saw, but he just looked at everyone and then at me with a confused expression. He scratched his head and said he only ran because he saw me running, but he didn't notice anything else. He hadn't looked at the riverbank, and he didn't hear the camera because he was too busy looking for bugs. That was the moment I learned what it felt like to be completely alone. I stood there under the skeptical eyes of my family, feeling a horrible sense of helplessness. The thing I wanted to do most right then was kick my cousin. 15 years have passed, but I still remember every detail of that man's appearance and his gestures. I always think about those photos he took. I wonder where they are now. Am I sitting in some collection somewhere, captured in a moment of pure terror? I still go back to that campsite with my family every year, but I don't feel comfortable there anymore. I'm always on guard. I don't know who that man was or what he wanted. The only thing I'm certain of is that it happened. It was real.
I still have a small scar on my lip as a reminder that this memory wasn't just a figment of my imagination.
I'm Nicole, 26, and I love life on the road. I converted an old Ford Transit van into a fully equipped mobile home. I came to the mountains of Montana in early winter. That night was December 17th, and the temperature dropped lower than expected. Even in the wilderness, I'd never felt lonely or scared until that night. I fell into a deep sleep, curled up in my thick sleeping bag, feeling safe in my little van. I jolted awake. My phone showed 4:27 a.m. Maybe it was just a tree branch blown against the van by the wind. The sound came again, and it wasn't a branch. My mind told me it might just be a hiker needing help, but no one hikes at 4 a.m. in such heavy snow. I reached for my phone, trembling as I turned on the video recording app. "I know you're in there. I've been watching you." A deep male voice echoed. My throat tightened. I tried to keep my phone steady. "I don't know you. What do you want?" I crawled towards the driver's seat, careful not to make a sound. Through the windshield, I saw a car parked far away, its headlights blazing. "I like the color of the underwear you're wearing." He sounded amused. My heart stopped. How long had he been watching me? "I've called the police. They're on their way." A raspy laugh replied. "There's no cell service here, Lisa. You checked when you arrived, remember? You even complained about it. A pretty car like this must have a lot of doors. I wonder if you've locked them all." I swallowed hard. The passenger window. It wasn't secure, and I hadn't had time to fix it. My survival instinct kicked in. I lunged for the driver's seat. The keys were already in the ignition. The engine roared to life in the dark. The van lurched forward, almost sliding off the unpaved road. In the rearview mirror, I saw the black car also start to move, its headlights aimed directly at my van. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, speed rocketing to 55 miles per hour on the slippery forest road. The snow fell heavier, visibility reduced to just a few feet in front of me. The other car closed in, less than 15 feet from my tail. I could see the outlines of two men behind the wheel. The road suddenly curved. Instead of slowing down, I tightened my grip on the wheel and took a risk. I knew a small path that continued along the hillside. As I reached the bend, I suddenly pulled the handbrake, sharply turned the wheel, and swerved the van onto the narrow path to the right. The van tilted but held on. The car behind couldn't react in time to the maneuver. It sped straight down the main road, tires screeching in the dark as they realized they'd lost me. I turned off my lights, letting the van slowly coast down the path. After a few minutes, I stopped beside a large rock, hiding the van from the main road. The receding engine sound indicated they had gone in the other direction. All night, I sat leaning against the door, my heart rate unable to return to normal. As soon as dawn broke, I drove to the nearest town's police station. I reported everything. The officer listened, his expression growing more concerned. "I need to tell you something." The officer sighed. "This isn't the first report we've received. In the past 6 months, 3 other women have reported similar experiences when alone at night. What happened to them? 2 of them disappeared 2 weeks later. The third was found, but I don't want to go into detail. So, there's a predator targeting women? Not one. I think they operate as a group." I returned to my van. The sense of safety it once provided was completely gone. I decided to drive home to my parents in Ohio and sell the van. On the way, I stopped in a small town to stay overnight at a hotel. As I walked into the hotel room and locked the door, the images of that terrifying experience kept replaying in my mind. I opened my phone to rewatch the video I had recorded. Maybe I would see something I had missed. With trembling hands, I opened the video file. The screen was pitch black, but the audio was clearly recorded. "Lisa." I replayed that part. The man had called me Lisa, but my name is Nicole. I quickly opened my Instagram app, searching for the name Lisa, along with the keywords van life and Montana.
After a few minutes of scrolling, my heart nearly stopped. A young woman named Lisa Wilson, with reddish-brown hair like mine, also lived in a van and had come to Montana 2 months ago. As I looked deeper into her pictures, I noticed many astonishing similarities. Not just the hair color, but also her hairstyle, clothing style, and even how she decorated her van. I scrolled down to Lisa's older posts. She bought her van from the same dealership in Seattle where I bought mine. The Ford Transit model is very popular in the van life community, and metallic silver paint is also a common choice. I scrolled further and discovered that Lisa had worked for the same travel magazine I had contributed to. I believed that if anyone followed both of us on social media, they could easily mistake us for each other. I rushed to my camera bag and pulled out an old memory card I hadn't deleted. There was a photo of a sunrise near the campground, and in the distance, I saw a Ford Transit van identical to mine. My hands trembled as I realized the truth. They mistook me for Lisa. Immediately, I called the police officer who took my report. The police asked me to bring the van to the station for a thorough inspection. My Ford Transit wasn't Lisa's van, but they were almost identical. More importantly, through GPS and gas station data, the police discovered that both Lisa and I had traveled similar routes within the past 2 months. 2 weeks later, I heard that the FBI had arrested 4 suspects at a secluded farm more than 60 miles from me. They found evidence linking them to at least 7 other disappearances in Montana and other states. This network had been operating for years, targeting people living on the road because they had less social contact. Lisa Wilson was not found alive. 6 months later, I'm still trying to rebuild my life in a small apartment in Columbus. I no longer live on the road, but I've never given up on my dream of freedom and exploration. Instead, I'm writing a book about women's safety. In my photography notebook, I still keep a picture of Lisa, the stranger whose life became intertwined with mine by chance. It was a cold, rainy night. It was around 2 a.m., and the temperature outside was about 45 degrees Fahrenheit. We had just left a fun party and were driving home. We were on a desolate, dark road that runs alongside the Rogue River in Belmont, Michigan. Suddenly, my friend who was driving gasped and stared straight ahead. My friend in the back seat and I quickly looked too, and we saw it. A figure was crawling on the pavement ahead, inching forward. "Is that a person or an animal?" I asked, my voice shaking. We drove closer. My friend at the wheel didn't slow down, but quickly swerved to avoid the thing. Our headlights illuminated it in a flash, and we zipped past. It looked like a woman, her hair matted and covering her face. Her clothes were soaked, and she was crawling in a bizarre way. She looked like a giant spider scuttling across the asphalt. No one spoke for a few seconds. All we heard was the car's engine and our own heavy breathing. After a quick argument, we turned the car around. Our main feeling wasn't curiosity. It was that our conscience wouldn't let us abandon someone in that kind of situation. When we came back, we saw her more clearly. It was a young woman, maybe in her 20s. She was hunched in the middle of the road in an unnatural crouch. Her knees were pressed together, her feet splayed out, and her body was bent forward. Her head was slowly swaying back and forth. We stopped the car a few yards from her. I stared, trying to analyze what was happening. Suddenly, she raised one hand and moved it up and down rhythmically. Then she abruptly stopped. A few seconds later, she started beating her head repeatedly with her hand. We could clearly hear the thud even inside the car. We were all startled by the woman's action. What truly sent a chill down our spines was her expression. In the headlights, we could see her eyes were abnormally wide open, but they weren't focused on anything specific. Her mouth was agape, but no sound came out. Her hair was drenched and stuck to her cheeks and neck. In that cold, there was no way a conscious person would be in that state. We decided to back up a little to observe from a safer distance.
Then she started to laugh. It sounded like a terrifying mixture of a cough and a moan, echoing in the empty space. My friend in the back screamed, "Drive! Drive now!" But the driver didn't react. I couldn't take my eyes off the woman either. She stopped laughing and started crawling toward us. She maintained that bizarre posture, arms and legs straight, head low to the ground, yet her face remained fixed on us. The distance between us shrank. I could hear her raspy breathing. My friend quickly slammed the car into reverse. The tires squealed and we backed up about 30 feet, but the woman didn't stop. She kept crawling toward us, one movement after another, maintaining her pace. Then she suddenly froze, completely motionless like a statue. We stopped the car, watching for a moment longer. We all held our breath, not daring to move. Then, as if someone had flipped a power switch, the woman collapsed straight down onto the road. Her body hit the pavement with a heavy thud. Immediately following was the loud impact of her head hitting the road. I winced, imagining how much that must have hurt. I quickly grabbed my phone and called 911, trying to describe what we had just witnessed. But I struggled with the words. She was crawling weirdly. She was hitting her own head, then laughing, and now she's lying still. The dispatcher tried to calm me down, telling us to stay in the car and wait. While waiting, I couldn't take my eyes off the figure lying on the road. About 10 minutes later, the police and an ambulance arrived. Paramedics rushed over to check the girl's vital signs. I saw them talking urgently to each other, and they quickly placed her on a stretcher. As they lifted her, I caught one last glimpse of her face. Her eyes were still wide but unfocused. A police officer came over to get information from us. My brain was trying to process everything we'd just seen. We were allowed to leave after about 20 minutes of talking with the police. A few hours later, after it was light out, I drove back to the scene alone. What I noticed was some freshly disturbed dirt along the riverbank near the road. This suggested that she had most likely fallen into the Rogue River and struggled to swim onto the road just minutes before our car passed. Over the next few days, the story slowly came together. The woman was named Angela, 28, a student attending Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, over 200 miles away. She had been reported missing 2 days before we encountered her. Angela's friend said that before she disappeared, she constantly talked about feeling like someone was following her. She was always in a state of high stress and on edge. When she finally woke up in the hospital, doctors explained that Angela had experienced a state of dissociative fugue. This is the brain's defense mechanism when a person faces levels of stress and fear that exceed their coping ability. The brain, unable to process the continuous horror, chooses to disconnect from reality. In this state, patients completely forget their identity. They don't know where they are or what they're doing. They can perform complex actions, like driving a car, but have no conscious awareness of those actions. Some studies suggest that patients in this state may experience hallucinations, hearing voices, or seeing images that don't exist, and acting on invisible commands. The brain creates an alternative reality to avoid confronting the true fear. Angela had been living in that alternative reality for 2 days. She drove aimlessly, without eating or sleeping. Then somehow, she ended up in the Rogue River. The shock of the freezing water must have roused a part of her consciousness enough for her to crawl onto the road, but not enough to fully regain awareness. I still clearly remember Angela's vacant eyes and her strange actions. What exactly had she gone through for her brain to simply stop processing? Angela physically recovered, but she remembers nothing about those 2 days. She went to sleep on a Friday night and woke up in the hospital on a Monday, completely bewildered. I still occasionally drive past that stretch of road at night. I wonder if there is anyone else wandering out there, someone trapped in a fuzzy world, no longer themselves. Have any of you ever experienced or known someone with dissociative fugue? If so, please share your story below. Perhaps your story will help others recognize the warning signs before it's too late.